I'm joined tonight by historian and former professor Dr. E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones is the editor of Culture Wars magazine and the author of several books, including The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and Its Impact on World History. His most recent book is Barren Metal: A History of Capitalism as the Conflict Between Labor and Usury. Tonight, I want to discuss his other book, which is Libido Dominandi. In that book, he provides a perspective on pornography, its political impact, its political use, and the role Hollywood has played in the sexualizing and degrading of American culture. Of course, time permitting, I might want to get into some of the other works, but Dr. Jones, in Libido Dominandi, you present the thesis that the preaching or the advancement of so-called sexual freedom or sexual liberty is actually a tool to impose political control.
Yes.
Can you go into that?
Well, there are a number of different ways to go into it, but the one talk I've given all over the world is that begins with talking about the Israelis invading Ramallah in I believe it was 2002, 2003. Anyway, the first thing they did was take over the TV stations, and the second thing they did was start broadcasting pornography over these TV stations. Now the question is, why would they do that? And if you're an American, you would have to say, well, because pornography means freedom, because that's what Americans believe. We have two Hollywood movies testifying to that fact, Boogie Nights and The People versus Larry Flynn. And the latter film has Larry Flynn saying explicitly in a courtroom scene, no one's free unless I'm free to broadcast pornography. So if that's the case, if that's true, then we have to believe that the Israelis want to bring liberation to the Palestinians. Well, that's preposterous. We know that the Palestinians want to conquer and subjugate the Palestinians. They'd like to exterminate them if they could. But the preliminary to that was occupying their land and trying to demoralize them. And that's why they broadcast pornography. So the conclusion we have to draw from this is that no, pornography is not a form of freedom. It's a form of covert warfare. It's also a form of political control. And from there, I often go and talk about the whole battle in the United States over obscenity, the battle between the Catholic Church and the Jews that took place in the 1930s. When Hollywood had gotten into a serious financial situation. Before they got into that, I'm referring to 1929 when they had to borrow a lot of money to finance talking pictures. And at that point, they were in debt. And then at that point, the stock market crashed. And at that point, people stopped going to movies. And so they were in trouble. Now, the church at this point simply took up the slack that the Protestants had taken up before them in the 1920s, because during the 1920s, when Hollywood films became more and more part of our culture, everyone was upset at the sexualization of the culture that they were promoting. First of all, we don't even know what they were doing, but there was a lot of nudity in the films. There was promotion of homosexuality even back then, and also ridicule of the clergy, blasphemy, things like that. And everyone was upset. The Protestants tried and lost their nerve and failed, and then the Catholics stepped up to the plate, and they created the Legion of Decency, and the Legion of Decency threatened the Jews in Hollywood with a boycott. And when the Jews didn't back down, the boycott started. It began in Philadelphia, where I grew up. Cardinal Doherty called a boycott of Warner Brothers theaters in Philadelphia. And by the time it kicked in